Hey guys, what's going on? It's Eli, back with another review video. And yes guys, that's right, you read the title, and you know exactly what it is that I am now about to review. Yep, this movie, being based off of a true story, and if you've known about this story, and even before this movie itself, from Disney, and from a great director, who brought this, movie to life, because, when it was written on a book, and when, with what happens in the movie, it was an actual event, and so on. Yeah. That all happened in the year of 1952, which, was on February 18th and such. And, this movie adaptation of this real-life event that happened, involving, a massive storm that split the SS Pendleton, an oil tanker ship, in two, and, with whom had survived in the Pendleton, and they managed to still be out in the ocean, like, half of that ship was still afloat, and, well, with them having to be saved and rescued and such, it's amazing. With what all happened and how it turned out in the end, those that saved the crew from the SS Pendleton became heroes, and, on that fateful day and such. So yes, guys, I am now finally reviewing, and not to mention, this one live-action Disney film is celebrating its anniversary. Yes, from 2016, The Finest Hours. Yes, The Finest Hours. And like I said, because this being directed by a really great filmmaker, Craig Gillespie. Yep. And Craig Gillespie, he has worked with Disney a good chunk of times, because before he directed this, he had directed one of my favorite live-action Disney films from the early 2000s, and, very underrated, and that being The $1 Million Arm, because with baseball and such, that film. But other films that he would go on to direct, and when he would work some more with Disney, well, he did direct the live-action Cruella film, but he had also directed I, Tonya and Supergirl. Yep. So, so the first things I have to say about The Finest Hours. Well, I had known about this movie for a long time, ever since it was first announced, and when it was talked about at D23, and Chris Pine, the main star of the film, came out on stage and talking about the film and such. I remember seeing a few of the trailers. Didn't get a chance to see this in theaters, and it was one of those movies that, I never got around to, but, until now, I finally checked it out, and I had a good feeling, of course. I knew that I was probably going to enjoy this, which I did. Yeah. I think I knew very little about the events that happened in the early 1950s. Just a little, yeah. Surely I would have known and such, and sure the same would go for any of you. But, with what Craig Gillespie, those at Disney, what they brought to life in this movie, from the events, and which were, brought to life on pages, when, there was a book written about it, because this movie, specifically being based on the book, which was, straight from Casey Sherman and Michael J. Tugais, if I even got his last name right or wrong, but again, you know me sometimes. And those that brought the screenplay to life from Scott Silver, Paul Tomasi, and Eric Johnson. Yep, and with Craig Gillespie directing the film and such, and with a great cast of talents that portrayed the people that were there, and, of course, those that would become the heroes, saving those from the SS Pendleton. Yeah. Every moment in this movie was pretty good. Yeah. The intenseful stuff, and the fact that, this was technically going on all in one day. I mean, the movie would first start off in 1951, where one of our main characters is at, but where he would find himself going to by early next year, yeah. Just this definitely, being another live-action Disney film that's underrated, but nothing about this movie is bad whatsoever. Because, again, if you know the actual events and have read the book, then I'm sure, any of you that have seen this movie, yeah, sure, most of you thought this was pretty good and such. A pretty good, well-put adaptation of what was written on the book and on account of what actually happened in the early 1950s. Yeah. The suspensefulness and some funny moments here and there, and the hard-hitting emotional moments, oh yeah, and if all of those that went out on this small lifeboat, to go through the bar, the intenseful waves on account of the crazy weather out in the ocean, in order to make their way and search the survivors of the SS Pendleton, just, yeah, if anyone was going to survive on that day, but in the end, and with how many survivors they were able to save, it all turned out great in the end. Yeah. So, yeah, just overall, and to finish off with the first things I have to say, The Finest Hours, it's a pretty good, well-put movie adaptation, what was from the book, and from the actual events in 1952. Yeah. Okay, so, with the first things I've had to say about The Finest Hours said / out of the way, now, as always, for me, read the description / the story. On February 18th, 1952, a massive storm splits the SS Pendleton in two, trapping more than 30 sailors inside the tanker's sinking stern. Engineer Ray Seibert, yeah, I think I said that right, bravely takes charge to organize a strategy for his fellow survivors. As word of the disaster reaches the Coast Guard in Chatham, Mass Chief Warrant Officer Daniel Clough orders a daring rescue mission. Despite the ferocious weather, Coxswain Bernie Weber takes 3 men on a lifeboat to try and save the crew against seemingly impossible odds. Okay, so now with reading the description / the story said / out of the way, now let us dive into The Finest Hours itself. Well, with the Disney logo, first off, because that was pretty cool, because, I always love when movie logos, they'll open with a theme to it and such. And wouldn't you think so, too? Yeah, it's always fun, In the case of The Finest Hours, because the way the lighting is, but on account that a Frank Sinatra song plays, Do the Hucklebuck, that song, that's a good Frank Sinatra song. And, obviously, to start off, because this movie being set in the early 1950s, in November, of 1951 in Massachusetts, well, it doesn't take too long for us to be introduced to the main protagonist of this movie, Bernie Weber, being played by / portrayed by good old Chris Pine. Yep. And, first off, Chris Pine, he does a fantastic job portraying Bernie Weber in The Finest Hours and such. And, obviously, to be true to what Bernie Weber was like in the early 1950s and such, and with what would happen to Bernie Weber on November 18th and such. Yep. And Chris Pine being no stranger to doing anything Disney live action. Well, anything Disney in general, because, before this, most prominently, he had been in the Princess Diary films, and he would go on to voice the main antagonist for one of the Disney animated films, Wish. Yeah. So basically Bernie is supposed to meet with his date, his girlfriend whom he's about to meet for the first time. And he had been talking with her on the phone and such. And I don't think it's like they were long distance or something, because, they both live in Massachusetts, And Bernie is accompanied by a friend of his slash a co-worker at the Coast Guard, Mel Gus Guthrow, or just Gus. Gus being played slash portrayed by B.O. Knapp. Yeah, I think I got the full name right. Because of his anxiety and such, he had his friend tag along, and both of them going on a double date. So when they go inside this diner, well, when Bernie thinks that, he's about to meet face-to-face with his girlfriend, Miriam, that's her name, it's actually not Miriam. It's a friend of hers whom is going on a date with Gus. And when Bernie would then spot where Miriam is, she's on the telephone, she's in this brown bear coat and such, and even like Bernie making a comment about that to his girlfriend. The coat that she has, like, looking like a bear, and mentioning Smokey the Bear. Only you can prevent forest fires. Of course. And Miriam being played slash portrayed by Holliday Grainger. And just 1 year before this movie, she was in another Disney live-action film in one of the remakes, which was a good one. She played Anastasia in Cinderella. Yep, that's her. So that's great to see, from one Disney live-action film to the next. Good for her. So Bernie and Miriam meet for the first time face-to-face, and Miriam is exactly, according to Bernie, how he pictured her. Yeah. And doesn't take too long for them to hit it off, and with all four of them going on a double date and such, going to a pub, and, at one point, Bernie and Miriam, they're talking to one another, getting to know each other, even Bernie mentioning to Miriam about his father and his three brothers and such, and having served in the war and all that. And then, Gus at one point suggests that all four of them should take a boat out in the ocean, a small boat and such. However, Miriam is not too keen at first, going out in the ocean in the nighttime. Yeah, that can be understandable. Especially, like, if you're nowhere near any place that has frickin' lights, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like when anybody's on a cruise ship or any boat in general, just looking way out into the ocean, no light. Yeah, and even if the moon's not in plain sight, that could be scary. Anyways, so Bernie actually in the pub would go up to these fellas that he knows of and ask for a boat that can be lended to him and the others. And through some talk and such and convincing and talking about Miriam, a special girl and all that, eventually they're lended this boat, and it still wouldn't take too long for things to hit off for Bernie and Miriam, even when Bernie helps Miriam get on the deck of the boat, and Miriam would kiss him, and the next couple of months, they would continue dating up to next year in February the 17th of 1952. One day before what would happen on the 18th. Because on February 17th of 1952, we would see Bernie and Miriam having a romantic dance, and Bernie would actually help teach Miriam how to dance, like, let the music sink in and all that, and kind of follow his lead and all that. And she would then get the hang of it. Then, at one point, out of nowhere for Bernie, Miriam asks him if he'll marry her. And, well, this came out of nowhere for Bernie. And look, it can be common for anybody, because how can you react to something like this when they just out of the blue bring this up? If you get what I'm saying, I'm just simply saying, because in a ways it is true. Bernie, he actually says no to the proposal. This upsets Miriam, and she walks off very upset and angrily. Bernie catching up to Miriam, telling her to come back inside because it's cold, and Miriam just, setting Bernie straight if he doesn't want to be with her and get married and have a happily ever after. He does, but the problem is, and because he works at the Coast Guard, with what might happen the next day on the 18th, and he's gonna be needed there. If any big, circumstances happen and all that, he's gonna have to be there. And that even Miriam asks him if he's really afraid of the weather or marriage. But Bernie, he establishes and assures her that, yeah, of course he's saying the right thing, because, yeah, of course, why wouldn't he? And he wants to get married to her. And hopefully, because if he can talk to his boss to let him off and such, and for them to proceed to get married and all that, then yeah. And when they pick a day/date when they'll get married, April 16th of that same year, just 2 months away. They're in February, it's only 2 months away. So, yep, it's settled. They'll plan to get married on the 16th of April. Yep, and, you know, just, yeah, everything's all patched up. Good thing to see. Well, however, and a little later that same evening, when, yeah, it seemed like, and when Bernie was hoping that the weather would cooperate and such, nothing disastrous would happen, something does happen out in the ocean. Because, yeah, we would see the SS Pendleton and the Ford Mercer, you know, out in the ocean, all that, and would, yeah, disaster would strike on them, because with the SS Pendleton, it was making its way from New York to Boston, and it would then make its way at one point out in the ocean into a, you know, crazy storm and such. And one guy on the SS Pendleton, believing that it, you know, this might be disastrous on account of the wells not be able to be, you know, holding position, all that and such, you know. Ray Seibert, yeah, that's how, I'm pretty sure, yeah, that's how his last name is pronounced, being played/portrayed by Casey Affleck. He tries to inform the captain about this and that they should reduce speed and course and all that, you know, but the captain doesn't take it seriously, which he should have. Golly. And to think that the captain wouldn't listen, golly. And, well, everybody else on the SS Pendleton, they're minding their own business. After calling it a night, they're relaxing, you know, singing and having fun, and those cooking in the kitchen. And the crew of the SS Pendleton, some of them right here I'm looking at, because, like, I'll read some of them, name them off, of course. Frank Fautex, if I'm even pronouncing the last name right, I don't know, but again, you know me sometimes, being played/portrayed by Graham McTavish, sounds right. D.A. Brown, being played by Michael Raymond James, whom I know best as Neil from the ABC series Once Upon a Time. But he's done more than that, just, yeah, but I most prominently remember him in that show, and I'm sure some of you guys do as well. And there's also George Tiny Myers, one of the cooks in the kitchen of the SS Pendleton, being played by good old Abraham Benrubi. Benrubi, I think I'm saying his last name right. Whom, you know, we would, I think for a lot of us, we would remember him best in another Disney live-action film, George of the Jungle, as Thor. Yeah, that's literally his character's name, Thor. But I also know him best for being the voice of Robot Chicken's Darth Vader. I'm sure most of you know that too. Yeah. But, you know, overall, he's a great actor, and in so many other great materials he's been in. Yeah. And, well, of course, Abraham Benrubi was good in this movie. And, yeah, I mean, and that goes for all of the other cast members. Because, yeah, you know, Chris Pine, Casey Affleck, and Holiday Granger, they were fantastic in this as well. Beug Nab, who plays Gus, he too was great as well. And when I talk about the rest of the cast members, then yeah, I'll, you know, with what else I'll be saying. And there's also Eldon Hannon, whom worked alongside with Tiny in the kitchen. Yeah, being played/portrayed by Keenan Lonsdale. Yeah, and I'll talk about the rest of the cast members as, you know, I proceed talking about this movie. Okay, and reviewing it. So, that one point, and, you know, to speed things up some, because sure enough, disaster would strike, with the waves, like, smashing into the Pendleton and breaking the wells and all that in the ship. Disaster would strike, and the water leaking in and such, and Ray attempting to, fix up most of it and keep the ship steady and all that. Even Frank, because he got injured at one point. One of his arms, like, broke and such. It was a bit broken. And at one point, Ray would discover, and when he went outside the ship, that half of it was missing. A good majority of the other half of the ship was missing, and seeing it out there just like rocking and all that, and then it would sink down underwater. Like, yeah, that was crazy. And, well, it's obvious that with what's going to happen later that day and morning arising and all that, yep, on the 18th, those at the Coast Guard obviously they're going to find out about this. And so, by the next day, on the 18th of February, yep, because Bernie, whom is at work at the Coast Guard, well, he would be told and would, find out about the crazy storms that were out in the seas, and, of course, with the mentioning of the SS Pendleton and such, because obviously, they found out, of course. And at one point, Bernie, he tries to ask his boss permission for leave to marry his soon-to-be wife, Miriam. And by the way, because Miriam is credited as Miriam Weber, I mean, okay, they're not married yet, but not that I'm complaining, I just thought I'd point it out, because it's true. Oh well. So Bernie, he would try to talk with his boss, which being Daniel Clough. Yeah, and Daniel Clough being played/portrayed by another good talent in this film, Eric Bana. Fellow Star Trek cast member, yeah. This film reunites both Eric Bana and Chris Pine, whom were in the first Star Trek film in the Kelvin timeline, because we know who Chris plays. And as for Eric Bana, the main antagonist from the Prime universe, who made his way in, him and along with Spock Prime, they changed time and created an alternate universe. Yeah, Eric playing Nero. Yeah, so that's great to see that they got to act in another movie and such, and after, say, Star Trek. Yep. I mean, because this time, because, like, Clough, not a bad guy, of course, he's just a tough-working boss and such, complicated and such, and kind of a bit difficult and such, but, but Eric Bana, again, another great talent, and he was great at portraying Daniel Clough in this film. Well, unfortunately, Bernie's not able to ask Clough to take a leave to, soon get married to his soon-to-be wife, Miriam, because, well, Clough would then put Bernie to tying up boats and such, and also would be assigned with Richard Livesay, if I'm even saying that last name right, being played/portrayed by another good talent in this film, Ben Foster, and whom was the first actor to bring to life Angel in the X-Men films. Yeah, but he's done other great movies than, just say Angel. But, the X-Men Last Stand was one of my first introductions to Ben Foster. Yeah, but Ben Foster, he too was great in this film as well, portraying Richard. And also, it's established that Richard has a prejudice against Bernie due to an incident that happened. It was nothing intentional of Bernie, because, in the line of duty of in the work of Coast Guard and such, yeah, an accident happened, someone that Richard knew, and, Bernie was in charge of what had happened and such. But, again, it's obvious that it's not Bernie's fault, because it just happened. It's just one of those things, Okay, but coming back to the SS Pendleton, and in the status that they're in, well, all of them would talk about maybe possibly, they think that one way to get, out off the SS Pendleton and save their lives is take one of the lifeboats. However, Frank, and he's nicknamed Pop, he would turn to Ray to handle this situation and to figure out what to do in the correct way, because, Ray knowing so much about the ship and all that, knowing all the complicated details and such, and if you would be an expert on all that too, and doing your research and all that, but anyways, so Ray, he confronts those, especially Brown, that using and taking a lifeboat, it would just be out of the question, because there's no way that the lifeboat would last. It would only last for a few seconds, because on account of the strength of the waves and on account of the crazy storm, it's impossible. There's no way. Yeah. And that's when it would occur to Ray that, and on account that the stern is broken and all that, well, yeah, the rudder and all that, well, when, like, Ray peels an egg, and it would occur to him, like, using a massive steel one beam as an improvised rudder to steer the ship towards safety, and having it hit a reef and such. They think it's crazy at first, but eventually they go along with it. So, to still speed things up some, and yeah, because that's what they would do. They would try to position the steel beam in position and to, act as a rudder. And then at one point, Ray would be informed about a good majority of the crew trying to take a lifeboat, get it ready and such. And Ray, he very quickly, he would take an axe and he would cut the rope and such, and there goes the lifeboat. And Brown and a couple of others, they would tackle Ray, because what the hell were you thinking? And all that. And the other crew that, they're on Ray's side, and they know very smartly, unlike the others who are dumb at first, no hard feelings on them, that, yeah, Ray knew what he was doing. And then they would see down below, it doesn't take too long for the lifeboat to be crushed by the waves, being hit, colliding with what's left of the Pendleton. Yeah, so Ray was right. And now they all have to go along with what Ray, what they need to do and such. And not to mention that most of them, not all of them, but most of them, including Brown, they have a prejudice towards Ray. But obviously everything's gonna be patched up in the end, and once they all survive. And yeah, the majority of the survivors being like 30 to 32, yeah, something like that. Anyways, so they would still get to work with, the steel beam and all that, and also a good chunk of crew members having to, pass on, down below the ship to Ray, like, of, what's coming and how, many miles and degrees and such, and thus, Ray can get to work to steer the ship and all that. Also, it was mentioned that the power was out, and what could happen down below could just, be disastrous and such. The basics. But, yeah, and when it seems like they're making good progress so far with, the improvised rudder using the steel beam, well, more chaotic waves would hit and collide with what's left of the Pendleton. The seawater coming in, ruining everything, and yep, even the steel beam on rope, it hit part of the inside of the ship and causing another hole of water to come in and such. And the ropes, well, the type of ropes they were using, while being strong, not strong enough in a situation like this. But that's when Ray would discover that the chains that are on the Pendleton, they're much more stronger than the ropes. I mean, it depends on the ropes. Obviously, ropes, if it's like electric or steel, whatever, then yeah, they're strong. But the chains, oh yeah, and judging how many chains and the power and length and strength of chains, yep, they can be very strong as well, even when it comes to boats like these. You get my point. Oh, and also, can't forget to mention that they also need to constantly blow the ship's whistle. So if anybody very close to where they're at, they'll hear the whistle, and thus, help arrives. Well, at one point, it's him. Carl Nickerson basically did hear the whistle way off in the distance and only could see a little glimpse of the ship, the Pendleton, very far. But yeah, but on account of how the weather looks in the sky, a bit foggy and such, yeah. But, and, barely hearing that whistle. Yeah, and Carl Nickerson, being played/portrayed by Matthew Maher, he would go inform those at the at the Coast Guard, and yeah, because Bernie and the others, having tied up the lifeboats and such, they would be informed by this, but they are suspicious at first because with how far away it would be and all that, but because there are some opinions and such, Bernie would take it upon himself, and everybody else that would tag along with him, back to the Coast Guard to inform, you know, the boss, of course, Clough. And when informing about this, turns out that, yeah, Clough, he had called up Boston, and apparently there was a helicopter that passed by, and thankfully managed to spot where the remains of the Pendleton, and where it is out in the ocean. And it is somewhere close to where the Coast Guard is in Massachusetts, but still, you know, a bit far away, you know. So, yeah, then unfortunately, Boston had sent out all of the rescue boats / ships to rescue those from the Ford. So basically, no ship going out to save anyone from what's left on the SS Pendleton. So Clough, and which is surprising to everyone else, would put Bernie Weber in charge to form a rescue mission. Yeah. Pick those to be a part of his team to go out and rescue those on the Pendleton. However, most of them at the Coast Guard, they are very, they're very skeptical, yeah, on, you know, the fact that Clough has handpicked Bernie to lead the rescue mission because, you know, on account of what happened last time, and as it would be, and as, you know, we've learned from Richard and some of the others that, you know, the last time Bernie was in charge of a mission, it led to accidental deaths and such, and if it could happen again. But again, it wasn't Bernie's fault. It's obvious. It's just one of those things, and in that kind of situation that, you know, but, you know, to those that are blinded by upsetment and anger, because even they would know deep down inside that it's not really that person's fault who was responsible and led, stuff like that. You get what I'm saying, yeah. So Bernie, and actually, some of them would actually try to advise Bernie to do a few laps and then just come back. But Bernie, he's planning to take quite the risk, and he asks those, like, whom is going to join his team. Surprisingly / unexpectedly, Richard raises his hand. He's the first to sign on to be alongside with Bernie. Gus, he wanted to tag along, Mel Gus Guthrow, but unfortunately, by this point, he becomes very sick and ill, and there's no way and under his conditions that he's able to do this. Yeah. So that's when a third-class mechanic would step in, which being, yeah, Andy Fitzgerald, yeah, being played / portrayed by Kyle Gallner, and a new recruit for the Lighthouse and such, you know, and in the Coast Guard, would be Irvin Mask, being played / portrayed by John Magaro. So, Fitzgerald, Irvin, Richard, all three of them would volunteer and join alongside with Bernie to go and try their very best to rescue those on the Pendleton. And yeah, because the fact that, you know, when we see them preparing to disembark, it's a very small boat. Yeah, it's nothing big or anything like that. Yeah. It's a Coast Guard motor lifeboat CG 36500. Yeah. Yeah, so that's the boat that they have and are able to use to do this rescue mission and such, and to fight the waves and pass the bar and all that. Yeah. Well, hopefully, and I think it's obvious, because they're going to pull through, definitely. Then at one point, when we would come back to Miriam, she's starting to sense that, yeah, something's not right. Which she would turn out to be right, of course. Yeah. But, you know, little did she know at that time, earlier, as well as, you know, Bernie, like, what was going to happen next, you know? And if Bernie was going to make it out of there along with the other three, being on that lifeboat and such and going out in the middle of the ocean. So Miriam at one point would try to call up Bernie, which, yeah, early on and when he was at the Coast Guard, because they were on the phone for a little bit, and Miriam, we see that she works, and yeah, because this was back in the 1950s, women working the operator stuff, you know, the telephones and all that. Yeah. So Miriam, yeah, she was on break for a little bit and was on call with her soon-to-be husband. But by this point, when she tries to call up Bernie, and right as Bernie is about to leave and head to the lifeboat, the phone does ring. Is he going to answer it? I was literally asking that myself. I mean, he's going to answer it, but yeah, he doesn't, because, yeah, I'm pretty sure, because, you know, if he was hoping to come back alive, then, you know, he would be there, and she would see him, of course, and that's why he didn't, I'm guessing, because that's why he didn't pick up the phone, because had he, then, oh yeah, because I think you get my point right there. So yeah, Bernie, and Fitzgerald, Irvin, and Richard, all four of them would pack up and prepare themselves to go out into the ocean. Yep, they are definitely taking quite the risk, but hey, you know, they've got to do what they got to do, of course, to save those that are still alive and are still standing on the Pendleton for as much longer as they can. And even say they would have, like, say, 4 to 5 hours to still be alive and well, and with how much longer what's left of the Pendleton has left, and how much longer it can stand, and before it's gonna sink and such. Yeah. And coming back to Miriam, because Miriam would actually make her way to the rescue station, the Coast Guard and such, and would try to, you know, find out about Bernie and all that. And Gus, you know, just knowing that this was a bad thing and not a good idea on what Miriam is doing, but Miriam, with how much she's worried about Bernie, I mean, she can't help it, of course. Yeah, it's understandable. With how much she's, you know, fallen in love with Bernie and such, you know, and just wants to get married to him. And Gus assuring Miriam, like, to calm down and hopefully, yeah, some good news will come in and all that. And when mentioning about, you know, Bernie and the others, like, you know, trying to cross the sandbar and all that, and if you know the sandbar, because, you know, it moves with the waves, but if things go wrong and on account of the sandbar, then the boat would lose control, and it would crash and be destroyed and all that. Yeah. Miriam then she can't handle it anymore, and she goes to confront and talk with Daniel Clough, and then Miriam would say to Clough about what Bernie was trying to do, ask permission for him to leave and then get married to Miriam and such. But Clough said that, you know, he didn't have to do that. That's his and hers business and such, you know. And not to mention that currently Clough is on the line with Bernie, and even when Miriam, you know, because hearing Bernie through the radio and such, I mean, on account that she wants him to be okay and safe, I mean, she would then ask Clough to, you know, tell them to turn around and all that, but it would just get out of hand, and Clough he doesn't care. He doesn't care. He just wants Bernie and the others just to get past the sandbar and make their way to the Pendleton once and for all. And like I said, things getting out of hand, and Clough would scare away Miriam, just, you know, telling her to get out and such, you know, because he won't stand it anymore. And Miriam just running off. She left her coat at the Coast Guard, and yeah, she gets in her car, just, you know, full with upsetment. However, at one point on the road, her car would lose control, and she would hit a pile of snow, and she would be there for quite a little while until nighttime approaches. But coming back to Bernie and the others, Richard, Fitzgerald, and I'm blanking on him. I'm blanking on his name. Yeah, Irvin. Yeah, that's right. He's right below Fitzgerald. Well, because to speed things up some, because they, well, of course they would make their way very closely to where the sandbar is, and Weber trying his very best, and through his experience and skills, listening to the sounds of the ocean, the waves, and how close the sandbar's getting. And even say when a huge wave is approaching them, where the bar is and all that, yeah, it would become very intense. The struggles that they would go through trying to fight their way through the waves, the sandbar and all that, and trying to keep the boat steady so it doesn't crash. And even when, say, the engine dies, both Richard and Fitzgerald would at one point have to go down below the ship to fix the problem and all that. Still, the risks they're taking to fight through the sandbar, the waves, all of that. And then eventually, because Bernie would have them brace themselves, and, with them trying to get through the waves, even when at one point they would actually be underwater for a brief moment, and in the end, they managed to make their way through the sandbar. Yep. So hopefully things will still go well, and it'll go according to plan that, now that they've passed the sandbars, they fought that, now they'll make their way and hopefully locate and make good progress finding the Pendleton. And speaking of the Pendleton, when we come back to the crew members of what's left of the Pendleton, the progress they're still trying to make, still keeping the Pendleton at a flow and all that, well, Ray Seibert would try to turn the ship around and on account of the waves and try to now hit rocks and such. And, well, yeah, because, long story short, and still to speed things up some because, yeah, the waves and on account of the storm would just become larger and larger. And the more water coming in the hole and such, and, they don't want it to get up to the point where, with how much water rises, the power goes out, because they still need power, because, thankfully, despite the ship having been cut in half, it's a good thing it still has power. That's a miracle for now. So, yeah. Unfortunately, it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. Another hull breaking and such, and with what they used, to steer the ship, just still going wrong, and, the more intense the waves are, etc. Yeah, still not looking good, but they are trying their damnest, that's for sure. Coming back to land in Massachusetts, because when we come back to Miriam, she gets help from this single mother, whom is a widow, with her 2 kids. She gives Miriam a lift, and that lady being B. Hansen, being played by Rachel Brosnahan, and whom, we know her best from, say, House of Cards and Mrs. Maisel, and most prominently would be the future Lois Lane. Turns out, and Miriam learns from Mrs. Hansen that, unfortunately she lost her husband in a sea accident, because of the Coast Guard stuff and all that, which just so happened to be led by Bernie Weber. However, Hansen, she has no grudge and prejudice against Weber whatsoever, because good thing she doesn't, because she knows very well that it was not Weber's fault that her husband was lost and he died, and even saying to Miriam that Bernie Weber is a good man. That's great to see, yeah. Because seeing a photo of Hansen's late husband and such, and so for a little while she remains with Mrs. Hansen and her 2 kids until a truck can come in to help get Miriam's car out of the pile of snow and such. Yeah. And coming back to Out in the Sea, Bernie, Richard, Fitzgerald, and Irvin still struggling, and by this point it's nighttime and the storm's once again out there. Because with their ship, their lifeboat's still fighting the waves and all that, and even when they try to call the lighthouse and such, they get no signal and they can't really hear them. And then it would lead to where all of them, they feel as though, and telling Weber that they should just turn back, because when they feel like that they they're not making any great progress. There's just no way to them at first. They're going to find the Pendleton. But Weber, he's having none of that. He makes it very clear that they've come this far, and what's the point when how far they've come? They almost died, but they didn't when they fought and passed the bar. Yeah. It's just, that would just be pointless. And they wouldn't be completing their mission. Yeah, so that's when, like, Weber manages to convince them that they need to still proceed. And coming back to the Pendleton, because, well, at one point, the main chef of the Pendleton, yeah, again, that being George, nicknamed Tiny. I mean, yeah, that's his middle name, but still, he tries to, at one point, when trying to settle things down and hoping to make a good cooked meal and such with what they have, but yeah, sure enough, the power does go out. The water managed to raise up some more, and boom, power's out. Yep, the light's not being shined, and yeah. I mean, at least the whistle still works. I mean, they still do that, even when, like Ray telling them to keep blowing that whistle, and if there's anybody that's hopefully gonna approach them nearby, and they'll hear that whistle. So, yeah. But I think it's obvious that, Hope is gonna step in. Because, knowing this story and with this movie, yeah, obviously, because all hope is not lost. Yeah. Okay, and to still speed things up some, and coming back to Miriam, because, yeah, eventually, her car would be pulled out of the pile of snow and such from Mrs. Hansen's brother, which being Carl Nickerson, yeah. Actually, because, there's a moment where Miriam, talking with Carl, and Carl addressing to Miriam that, even, with what they're saying and such, it's not Carl's fault. He's not the reason that, with Weber being out there and all that. You see, just, yeah, with what they talk about and such. But coming back to Weber and all the other three on the lifeboat, actually, at one point, they would just so happen to be very close by where the ship is. Yep, the SS Pendleton. The Pendleton almost slipped out of my head. And they would, be very quiet and listen, and, well, sure enough, they can see the Pendleton, and by hearing the whistle, and Fitzgerald would, shine the light, and everybody up top deck would come up with their light shining. Yep. Now, they can get off the boat and such. However, the lifeboat can only carry at maximum 12 people. And on account that how many people are still alive on what's left of the Pendleton, 30. Yes, 30. But Bernie, he's not going to leave anyone behind. He's determined and bound for all 30 of those men to be on board the lifeboat. And they're willing to take that risk, all of them. In fact, with them, some of them jumping out of the Pendleton right into the water, even when some of them, they would jump on the lifeboat, but they would miss the boat and all that. And then there's a moment where one young sailor, and who worked alongside with the main chef, Tiny, Eldon, yeah, he's terrified of, climbing down a rope and all that. However, Ray and Tiny, they would comfort Eldon, and Tiny would go first, and Eldon would go next, because, yeah, you're right behind me and all that. However, the rope, and on account of the ladder, I should say, not rope, ladder, being moved by the storm / the wind, and Tiny, Tiny being played by Abraham, why him? Just, he unfortunately slips off the ladder, and he would collide with the ship and such. He would die, and his body would sink. Ugh, that's unfortunate. Yeah, why Tiny? Why him? Being played by Abraham, just... well, just one of those things, but yeah, it's unfortunate. So, Yep, that's the end, and that's the end and demise of Tiny. And Eldon's still being terrified in the fact that Tiny just died, but Ray and the others, they assure him that, he'll be okay. And ultimately, he gives in, he, jumps off, and he's caught by those on the lifeboat. Then with everybody else still trying to get off, and at one point, Richard says to Bernie that, they should just go and come back for the others. But Bernie, no, he's still determined for everyone to get off the lifeboat. And in the end, now it's down to 29, because, unfortunately Tiny was lost. So, yeah, all remaining 29 men on the Pendleton have been rescued. They're all on the lifeboat. And, yep, ultimately, in the end, the Pendleton, what's left of the Pendleton, would be taken by the waves, and it would eventually, finally, sink. Yeah. And also, can't forget to mention that at one point and early on, when they were fighting the waves and all that, Bernie and the others, they did at one point lose the compass. And without the compass, then, well, what now? I mean, would there be any chance they would find those on the Pendleton? Well, of course, they managed to proceed and succeed without the compass, and which they did. But still, without the compass, how are they now going to get back home? Which direction? Just, yeah. And even back at Massachusetts on land and at the Coast Guard and such, everybody, listening in, and eventually when Bernie would make contact with his boss and everyone else, and the progress they're making now, and, well, hopefully they can get back. Not to mention the light that's at the Coast Guard guiding those out in the ocean to come where they're at and such. Well, at one point, and on account of how intense the storm is on land, the power actually does go out. And there was a very touching moment where Miriam, because, yeah, she's there as well as Mrs. Hanson, because at one point both of them are handling the food and such. Hanson becomes very upset, and Miriam comforts Mrs. Hanson. Yeah, that was a nice moment there. Well, everybody in the cars, they would leave the place, and they would go to a different place, and coming back to those on the lifeboat, Bernie, his 3 men, and all the other 29 men that came from the Pendleton, because, they're doing their very best to fight the coldness, the weather, as the lifeboat still proceeds through the ocean. And even we can start seeing some of them, just kind of being woozy and all that, just because of the coldness and such, how freaking blizzarding it is. Just, yeah, who can blame them? And Weber, he's trying to fight it. And because he's steering the boat and such, he's trying his very best. But luckily, and at one point, and Miriam having another moment where she's sensing something, well, she would leave the car headlights on, and everybody else starting to do the same thing. Do what she's doing, turn your lights on in your car. That's what they would do, because the light that guides the way is no longer working. Well, the best option to do now is have everyone's car headlights to be turned on. So yeah, the lights of the car, and guess what? It worked! It worked! And yeah, because with how close the lifeboat is getting to land, that's when they start to see, a little bit off in the distance, lights on, and it's coming from the cars. Miriam's plan worked, and she technically did become a hero as well, when you think about it. So yep, they start to see one another, they're getting very close to the dock, yep, and everybody applauding and cheering and, complimenting on Bernie and all that, and even Richard, he's by this point now forgiven Bernie Weber. Yeah, everything's good now. And it was obvious that towards the end, everything would be all patched up from those that had, a grudge feeling towards this person, because, yeah, those on the Pendleton, how they felt towards Ray, but they had a change of heart towards Ray, and those, how they felt about Bernie, yeah. So, with what both Bernie and Ray went through, each of them throughout this movie, but in the end, those that were prejudiced towards him, it was all cleared up, yeah. Even Clough, I mean, he was surprised when, he heard on the radio in his office on what had happened. And he was in his office. He wasn't there with everyone else. Oh, well, that's just him, his personal business. So yeah, everybody leaving the boat and such, except for Bernie, still being cold. But when Miriam steps in, and yeah, of course, one of the first things is that they kiss, and yeah, now Bernie's all better and feeling warm towards his girl. That's very sweet. And April 16th is still a go for them to be married and such. Now they can finally live happily ever after, get married and all that, which they did so. Because in movies like these, because, you know, we would get like an aftermath with text, and yeah, because they did, according to the movie, they did proceed on getting married, Bernie and Miriam, and they lived happily together for 58 years until, in 2009, the Bernie Weber would sadly pass away at the age of 81. Yeah. And as for the other people, like, you know, those that served with Bernie, as well as, you know, those of the Pendleton, well, yeah, some of them, like, they would receive awards and such. Yeah. And on account of the heroism and all that, just, yeah. With what the movie explains to us, like, yeah, that's great to see. It all ended great, and yep, that being a historical moment that happened in Massachusetts. Definitely. Yeah, so yeah. That's our film. The Finest Hours. It's, yeah, again, it's a pretty good, well-put movie and biopic, I guess you could say. Yeah, being based off of a true story, what was written on paper, and of course, what came from the actual events on February 18th, 1952. Everything that this movie had to offer, from beginning to end, its storyline, great cast of talents that brought to life the actual people that, yeah, were a part of those events in 1952 with the SS Pendleton. Yep, from Chris Pine, Casey Affleck, Ben Foster, Eric Bana, Holiday Granger, and I didn't mention some of the other cast members. Wallace Quirey, if I got the last name right, being played/portrayed by John Ortis, Kyle Gallner, John Magaro, Graham McTavish, Michael Raymond James, B.O. Knapp, John Stewart, played Southerland, Abraham Ben-Rabi, and Rachel Bronzana, Kyman Lonsdale, Benjamin Cold Kai, Matthew Mayer, and Dominic Garcia being played/portrayed by Jess Gabbard, and everybody else that was a part of this movie. They did a fantastic job. The music and score, really good, of course. The visuals and the action, the intenseful stuff, the climax, all that happens on land and sea. And with Greg Gillespie's direction, the funny and hard-hitting emotional moments, the drama and such, just, yeah, everything from The Finest Hours, everything that this movie had to offer from Disney and Craig Gillespie, and with a fine cast, everything just, yeah, really good. Definitely. All of the above. And I'm giving The Finest Hours, why not? Yeah. 9 out of 10 stars. Yes, 9 out of 10 stars for The Finest Hours. And what about you guys? What did you think of The Finest Hours itself? Any of you that got to experience this in theaters? Do you remember first hearing about this, and when it came to, say, as I mentioned, D23, and, did you think this movie was well done from what happened in the year of 1952 and when there was a book written about it? If you had that book and if you've read it, favorite moments to come from this movie, favorite cast members and whom betrayed the actual people and such from that event, favorite lines and so on, just, yeah, and if you got some good laughs, because again, there are some funny moments and such in this, but definitely the hard-hitting moments, yeah. And if this made you a bit teary-eyed, but overall, if you enjoyed this movie for what it is, just, yeah. And if you think that this was a pretty good Disney live-action film and maybe in your top list, I don't know, just, yeah. But again, overall, what do you think of The Finest Hours itself with what all I've had to say, my review? And yeah, what did you think of my review. Leave comments and give this review video a like, as always. And so, guys, with all that being said, thank you very much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed my review of The Finest Hours. More review videos are coming your way. They're going to be awesome. Keep looking forward, and I will see you guys in the next video/review. And stay tuned later tonight, because what I will be reviewing next is another Disney live-action film. However, this one is a live-action remake, and it came out just a few months after The Finest Hours came out. And let's just say that I'm sure to most of you, this was a pretty good live-action Disney remake. Yeah, and just so happens to be directed by, you know, a great director/great actor, Jon Favreau. Do you know what it is? I'm sure you probably do, because coming out the same year as The Finest Hours, yeah. Anyways, again, stay tuned for that. Take care, happy anniversary to The Finest Hours, and peace out.